So if you could hand out the quizzes, please. This will take a couple minutes. Face down, face down. See, I have to tell you a story now. On the first day I told you about how my mother would tell me to listen to my teachers and then drill me about what I learned. Well, that was because she was a teacher. Well, my grandfather was a preacher, and now you get to experience the other half of my personality. Does everybody have their quiz yet? Raise your hand if you don't have your quiz. Oh, face down, face down. No cheating. Anyone else without a quiz? If we could cut the music, please. Don't want to interrupt people's concentration here. Okay. The quiz. You're going to use both sides of this paper, but you're going to start with the blank side first. Okay? Blank side first. I am not going to give you the hardest part of the quiz. I'm going to give you medium difficult quiz. Without looking at any of your notes, I would like each of you to write down 2 objectives of this workshop that you remember.
It's written here.
No. That's the quiz. Write down 2 objectives that we put out to you for this workshop. See, I'm not asking for all 4.
Do we have to use a number 2 pencil, or can we use...
Use whatever writing instruments you care to, just not blood.
Is this an open book test?
No, not an open book test. 'Those of you who are late only have about 2 more minutes to complete your quiz. Thirty seconds. Okay, pencils down. Okay, from the audience, Someone give me one of the objectives from your paper. Anyone?
To increase to increase vaccine production in developing countries.
That's our goal. But what's the objective? What do we want to accomplish in this workshop? Make some goals, okay? Speak up.
To create the priorities.
Create priorities.
To identify gaps for vaccine productivity capacity.
Identify gaps.
To learn more about regulatory requirements.
Okay? To learn more about the current status.
Yes.
Where and how existing resources should be committed.
Where and how existing resources should be committed. Any others? Well, that's one of them. I gave you a freebie. There's one more, but it's not fair because we haven't even gotten to that session yet, which is identifying new stakeholders and ways to engage them. And that will be a topic of our subsequent sessions. Now, the purpose I wanted to do for doing that was to bring us back to why we're here. Because we've been talking about technical issues, we've been talking about diagnostics, anti-sera, we've been talking about costs, surveillance, and I am not a biomedical scientist. And sometimes I have to keep reminding myself what I'm here for. We need to use all of the information that you have heard so far to achieve these objectives in this workshop. Number one, what did I do with it? Review the current status of global influenza vaccine manufacturing capacity and current investments to increase it. I think we've covered that. Two, suggest ideas and priorities to HHS and other international partners for future investments in capacity building. We've heard some of that, but we're hoping between now and the time you leave, we will have more concrete ideas from you and suggestions about how we can do that. Three, identify needs and gaps in global influenza vaccine manufacturing to better meet the needs of developing countries. And we've been hearing it all along in each of the sessions, whether it's on technology transfer, whether it's on surveillance, whether it's on regulatory, there are needs and there are gaps. Now, today, I'd like to focus on short, medium, and long-term strategies and milestones in achieving the long-term goal of developing sustainable vaccine production capacity in developing countries. I have no slides other than these, no presentation. I want to get this information from you because you know much better than I do what's needed and what appropriate approaches might be. Next slide, please. Oh, I have it somewhere. Here it is. So, I mentioned yesterday that I have a tendency to get overwhelmed with details. And in listening to all of the items and all of the issues that we've been discussing, the recurring ideas that have come up have been that we can't possibly achieve our goal overnight. It's going to take time. It could take decades to achieve our ultimate goals. But we need to have some sense, and hopefully by the end of this workshop, some general sense of priorities and general directions, both for the short term, the medium term, and the long term. And as I've been listening, I've been trying to categorize I'm not a lumper. I don't know whether this translates well, but in American English, we tend to characterize people as lumpers or splitters in terms of how their brain works. A lot of people try to find ways to put categories together. Other people try to find ways to split them into different categories. So I'm a splitter. And I will make all of you lumpers very frustrated in this process. But the kinds of things that I've heard as sort of subsectors that we need to be addressing in this workshop and for the future are technology, regulatory functions, the pure process of managing manufacturing, getting the production lines up and running, and managing surge capacity, or being able to respond to surge needs, surveillance and laboratory, and capital and financing. And lastly, my favorite, of course, are politics. We've talked a lot about politics, but in reality, every single topic we've talked about has some political component to it that unless we manage that well, all the technical expertise in the world is not going to get us where we need to go. We also seen that there have been very strong efforts in many of these areas to try to make progress in each of these subsectors. But as I've said before, I would like to spend this little bit of time we have here trying to think about ways to prioritize what we've heard, identify stepwise approaches, not perfect, just some general directions, and some some stepwise approaches and priorities so that we can come away from this meeting and develop an action plan, not only for the U.S. government, but also, hopefully, for others in the room who may have interest in investing or partnering or trying to figure out what their next step should be. Now, I've been asked several times here, excellent question, so what's the product? What do you want out of this? What do we want out of this workshop? And taking my lead from my co-chairs, I think that the main products that we want from this are your ideas, as we said before. But to be very concrete, we're really anticipating a larger technical document that can be a reference, that we can pull your ideas and the breadth of information that has been presented here, so that we can refer back to this room of experts that talk to us about the future. We also envision a much smaller document that we're calling a framework. We're not calling it a roadmap, that has too many other connotations, but a framework that's shorter, 3, 4, 5 pages, that lays out general areas of where the future lies and where we need globally and as a community to concentrate our efforts. And each of us has something different to contribute. Some in the room have checkbooks. Some in the room have knowledge and expertise. And others simply have a desire to do what's right. But we need a framework to identify general priorities, because we can't do it all at once, so that people in this room and people outside this room can see a potential role for themselves in trying to achieve the overall goal of increasing influence of vaccine manufacturing capacity in developing countries. So, the first thing I'd like to do as we go on this hour-and-a-half journey is, and I'm hoping my staff are taking notes because I can't do it. I want someone to define for me sustainable. We've used it, we've said it. Sustainable to me may mean something different than someone else in this room. Let's get a variety of definitions of what we mean by sustainable. Because if we can't define, if we can't clarify really what we're all trying to achieve, then we're all going to go in different directions. So, the second part of the quiz, and it's not written, but verbal, oral test here, oral exams. Someone please define sustainable or sustainability for me so that we can frame the next hour's discussion. Great ball?
Something which is sustainable can continue without a constant influx of new financial resources.
Influx from whom?
From external donors.
That's an important point. Because any enterprise like this is going to require ongoing resources. The question is from whom? And I think that as speaking from a donor's perspective, we're thinking of how can we reduce our investments in this area so we can increase our investments in other areas.
I think something to consider could be that the demand and the supply are balanced so the entire system can be sustainable.
Okay. So that's an important concept. You can have all the inputs in the world. We've said that already. Lots and lots of inputs. But unless you have a product coming out that has a usefulness and a utility in society, all your inputs aren't worth it. Please. Microphone, please.
Yeah, sorry. For me, it's something that is not strong to keep itself.
I'm sorry, say one more time.
I'm sorry, it's sustainable for me. It's something that is too strong to keep itself.
Okay? It's strong enough
It's
to
strong
keep
enough.
itself going. So the concept of strength. Okay? Good. Strength. We haven't heard that. Please.
For me, sustainability means that I'm always satisfying the needs whenever it's changing or not. This is how to make it sustainable. There is always changes, and I have to respect or to meet these changes. This is sustainability.
Sustainability. That's the, if I could rephrase it, the flexibility to meet changing needs. Very important. Please.
Kind of piggybacking on this track, I think self-supporting is key to sustainability.
Self-supported. And there are different variations of self-supporting as well. It comes out of all my pocket, or I partner with someone, and we have a collective pocket. But internally, it can be paid for. I saw a hand in the back, please.
I think just to follow on your theme of politics, it either has to be able to survive political changes or be above partisan politics to be able to be sustainable.
Excellent point. Yeah. Non-partisan, not affiliated with any particular government, ideology, or political position. Excellent. Any other ideas? Please, it's okay.
In this particular sense, I think to reduce the external financing from the donor governments and to make it dependent through the private-private partnership.
Okay. Public-private partnerships. No one entity has to do it themselves. Any other ideas? Mind you, I don't have a definition written down. I don't have anything in my mind of what I wanted to achieve here, other than to get from you and to demonstrate the breadth of definitions of sustainability. So that when we say we want sustainable systems, it means something different to different people in this audience. And we have to recognize that to build a sustainable system, we're going to have to meet all of those definitions. Otherwise, for you, if it's not flexible, it's a failure. If it's not nonpartisan, it's a failure. If it's not, can't be paid for internally, it's a failure. And from a political perspective, You will never be able to satisfy everybody at all times, but you should try. Any other last ideas about definitions of sustainability? Please.
Maybe it's not the other definition, but it's part of the take in consideration. This is the support by the scientific evidence.
Evidence-driven. Evidence-driven. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Very good. So I've made my point. When we talk about sustainability, it means something different to everybody in the room. So we need to be able to address all of those issues in terms of building or prioritizing our efforts in the future. Now, the other concept I wanted to put in place here, or to suggest here, is the idea, as I said, stepwise, established priorities, and a natural progression. The concept of there are things that have to come first, and things that have to follow. And in the presentations here, I'm not being a biomedical expert, I had a hard time understanding what should come first. What is absolutely necessary to build as a foundation upon which all these other things must rest. So that's the next question I'm going to pose to you. What are the absolute fundamental building blocks of a sustainable system of vaccine manufacturing capacity in developing countries? Anything. The first thing, if you wanted to start from scratch, maybe we want to think about that way. If you want to start from scratch, what would you do first? Joe?
I think the first thing is the understanding of the need for the vaccine by whatever partners are important.
Yeah, this is related on the demand side. I think right now there's a very urgent need to deliver on the H1N1 vaccination, the donation program, 10% that exists out there, but has not yet been delivered in any countries. And if that fails, I think it would be a huge setback.
Because there's a demand.
The demand has to be realized. Yeah.
The foundation is you have a demand. Now, in listening to a lot of what we've been doing, in some ways, we kind of have it backwards. We have the technology, we have the manufacturing, but we don't have the market. What private sector entity in their right mind would set up a shop without assessing the market and their customers? The public sector maybe, but...
Exactly.
Please.
I'm just taking back to the Thai discussion yesterday about how it took 5 years to build their business case. And really, I think the fundamental starting point is the disease, and understanding the disease and the pattern of the disease and the surveillance of the disease, and building the business case from there. It's a little bit frustrating when you have some of the tail end wanting to, jump the head, but you've got to try and keep the head in front.
Okay. Business case. Yes, in the back, please.
In terms of defining the need, I think a couple of the targets that occur is just the critical infrastructure, is it herd immunity versus the whole population.
Okay. For not everybody in the room, someone at a microphone, could you explain the difference between herd immunity and whole population? Just so we are all in the same place. Pardon me if I get it wrong, you can correct me. Herd immunity is in simplified version, is you immunize enough of the population that you're able to decrease or stop transmission of that virus in the population, which means that you don't necessarily have to vaccinate every single person in the population. And the ability to reach herd immunity is really inherently related to the pathogen, the virus, and its interaction with its hosts, whether it be animals or humans. Marie Paul?
You know, when you say there needs to be a strong business case, I agree with you, but business does not necessarily mean market, because as my boss, Dr. Sweet from Thailand, is saying, you know, it may be based on a concept of health security. And as he said at the World Health Assembly, if a country wants to buy a submarine, nobody asks them why and how it will be cost effective. So it depends also what is the purpose, but there needs to be a political drive in the country to have this go. But it doesn't need obligatory. It's better if you have a market, financial market, but not everything in this world is about money, I hope.
So what I'm hearing is that the first priority is in order to build your case, even if you want to have a market, you need to have information. To have information, you've got to have data. To have data on influenza, what do you need? Surveillance. So if we want to take off the layers of the onion here, what we're really talking about is foundation is data. And you get your data from surveillance, whether it be laboratory, whether it be syndromal, whether it be whatever. You need surveillance. You get your data. You need to build your political case and your business case. And I would say that those are not, you can't separate those. Even if it's a business case, it's not trying to make profit. You've got to be able to demonstrate the benefits to a population. May not be financial, but I tell you, ministers of finance are going to listen if you start talking, as Thailand did, in terms of, we will reduce your expenditures in hospital and in clinics. So, data, business case, small b. What's the next? What are you going to build on top of that? And it doesn't have to be any, just have one thing. Is there anything other that's absolutely critical to have a good foundation so your house doesn't fall down?
I mean, I think when you say surveillance, at least in my mind, there are two components to that. First is you need to know whether or not you have the virus. If you're talking about influenza, you want to know, is the virus here, yes or no? Second, you need to understand how it contributes to disease burden. Because you can say you have loads of virus, if it doesn't cause disease, who cares? On the other hand, if it's killing people, well, that's a big difference. And so I think you need to be able to link that with your clinical data. So yes, surveillance for the virus, but that needs to be coupled with disease burden data, clinical data.
Anything else that's absolutely essential? I do have the answer to this one. Please, sir.
Political will.
And political will is measured in
terms of government support. Dollars.
Money. So part of your business case, it was implied in that last part in terms of the business case is it's going to cost you, but there'll be a benefit and or a profit. So the foundation really is, and in reality, you can't have surveillance unless you have some capital to invest in your information gathering. So I've been in the public arena for my entire career. But I'm beginning to realize that I have to think more like the private sector. You've got to do your market analysis. You need to understand your business risks. You need to know who your competitors are. If we're talking about trying to help individual companies develop the capacity to produce influenza vaccine, who's the competitor next door? what's the regional market environment, even if it is for profit. As we said, there has to be some return on investment somehow. We aren't going to, unless you are completely subsidized by governments, you are going to have a vaccine at a price. Someone's going to have to pay. Whether it's the private sector or the public sector, someone's going to have to pay. So we need to be thinking about how would we, if you wanted to set up shop, what is it you would need to do first on a corner somewhere? You need to know who your competitors are and what comparative advantage you have. What's your competitive advantage? Okay? All right. I don't want to belabor this too much, and I don't want to build too much of this house. But I wanted to be sure that we were clear on what the most fundamental issues are. Because I think that there would be a wide variety of opinion about then what should be making up the first floor. Is it the technologies? Is it the, let's go back to my list here. The regulatory, is it the political? It's really, you can build any house in any shape you want. It can have any appearance that you want in any style. But I think I wanted to emphasize that without understanding the foundation, no house will stand. And you can craft your house any way you want to above the foundation. So, in thinking about the general theme of this session, short, medium, and long-term strategies. Now I said, what would you need if you wanted to start from scratch? What we've already said is starting from scratch is probably not a good idea. That you really want to seek out those entities that have experience, who are along the spectrum of business and industrial and technical abilities, that by investing some, you're likely to get a bigger return in terms of better product, quicker product at a better price. Because the investment will be smaller than starting from scratch. So, I don't want to belabor the point of we need to do 193 manufacturing facilities. But in thinking about all the things we've talked about in the last day and a half, what are reasonable short-term strategies? We'll get to the medium term, the long term. And I want to make a distinction here between short-term, what do we need to do in the next 2 years? I want to make that different consideration than what should we achieve in the next 15 years. Because if you want to achieve something in 15 years, you may indeed have to invest today. When I ask this question in a different venue, what priority should we have for the next 2 years? Everybody said, well, we can't possibly achieve that in 2 years. Well, that's true. There are things, though, that we can begin or continue to prioritize in hopes that in 15 years we will achieve certain milestones. Now, before we start answering this question, I want to address the issue of milestones. Again, I'm not a biomedical scientist, and I heard a lot of needs. And in terms of, we need to find a way to synthesize those needs into clear, definable milestones. When will we have achieved phase 1 preparedness or stage 1 preparedness? When will we have arrived with a particular company of where we want to be at a first step? If we don't have clear milestones set for ourselves, we cannot evaluate our own progress, and we cannot describe or convince anybody else of our progress. So I don't have any clear pictures of what the appropriate milestones should be on the road to increasing manufacturing capacity. We could choose in milestones of we've increased manufacturing capacity in developing countries by 500 million doses per year. Well, okay, that's the goal. But what are the measurable intermediate steps that are absolutely necessary that will be highly predictive that you'll be able to achieve that goal? And I'm not clear what those are. So, that's my preaching about milestones. I'm not suggesting that today we will come to consensus on what the best milestones are. But we need soon, in the near future, to be clear on what our measurable milestones are going to be. So let's address this very quickly here. In terms of thinking of a 15-year time period, what are reasonable short-term priorities and strategies or investments or activities that as a global community should be the highest priority in the next 2 years? Microphone, please.
Strengthen the surveillance in the areas that we don't have as a gap.
Okay. Strengthen surveillance. RuPaul?
To continue provide support to the project which are already started until they reach a licensed product domestically.
Okay. Other critical short-term priorities.
I think completing the, or developing the metrics to evaluate the progress would be a good short-term priority.
Absolutely. If you don't know where you want to be and how you're going to measure how you're going to get there, if you don't do it at that beginning, it's impossible to do it later.
I think that something very important is to map out the current manufacturing capacity in the world and the demand for seasonal vaccine and the potential demand for pre-pandemic and pandemic vaccine, given the example with H1N1. And we need to do a regional analysis of where the capacities are and how they can be utilized in the pandemics to be to be able to implement sort of a regional response. And that has to involve governments and obviously companies, because you may be in a situation in which you're going to develop a lot of these public initiatives, governments developing their own vaccines, and then you have the big companies producing vaccine that then nobody's going to buy. So, those stakeholder things that we were talking about needs to be incorporated in the analysis. So, a very clear analysis of what's supply and what's demand is a priority.
Other ideas in terms of priorities? Joe?
I think, generally speaking, understanding the data that national policymakers need to make a decision on introduction of vaccine.
I'm a physician. Some of the worst communicators and convincers of policymakers are physicians. You really need a translator to translate the technical into information that the policymakers will understand and that it will be important to them. So you have to frame the questions in terms of national security, in terms of what will this do for my constituents and the voters in my area? What will this do to get me a photo opportunity or to get reelected? I mean, I'm being crass, but welcome to politics. The other short-term strategies, just as an idea, is I think we've talked a lot about technical solutions, and the need, and one of the ideas for sustainability are these multi-use platforms. in terms of planning and developing and building on what is already in place, I think we really need to be very clear on what are the opportunities for those multi-use platforms so that we can begin to build on them or develop them where they don't currently exist. Because that's an upstream activity. It's much more difficult to have 2 or 3 vertical programs in a country for 5 to 10 years and then tell them they need to integrate. Very difficult.
As much as I agree with that, well, first of all, I'm going to defend Joe's comment on physicians. I think you were making the point earlier. Some of my best friends are physicians, by the way. You were making the point earlier about the importance of educating the press, and I think, taking Joe's point, I think, and your point, I think what I'm hearing is the importance of educating those who will be communicating as to how to communicate and what to communicate. And I think that you do need somebody with credibility. I mean, working in a developing country, one of the things I've observed is that often in order to move things forward, having somebody with real credentials is really important, perhaps more so than often in the West. So I would argue that a physician is not a bad communicator so long as they know what to communicate. And so being clear on message and being able to standardize that message in ways that are important, I would argue is an important early step. Regarding your second point that you just the point you just made about multi-use platforms, I think you can also argue that that's an intermediate stage, because in setting up your surveillance and making the case where you're now having surveillance in places where we have skip areas, you then will begin to identify areas of overlap and common themes where you can say, now we can parlay this into not just, let's say, influenza surveillance, but influenza, invasive pneumococcal disease, TB, whatever it is, and begin to organize it in ways that are meaningful by region or even by country.
And importantly on this concept, we've talked a lot about here in the hallways about how influenza for many countries and many policymakers is not a priority. So if you have systems that are important in terms of surveillance for malaria, for TB, for dengue, for whatever, is lead with your strengths in terms of their interests. The incremental costs of piggybacking or building on top of that are so much smaller than trying to convince them from the beginning that influenza should be the most important thing that they should be considering. We're getting close on time here. Medium and long term. Next slides here. Let's see if I can get this to work. And I'm actually going to go to the medium. I'm going to combine the medium and long term. And I'm going to put out there is that a lot of what I heard today, we even saw slides with timelines in terms of new technologies and new tests, new knowledge that needed to be generated. And there were timelines of 5, 10, 15 years. And so those, by definition, are not going to get short-term results. And in terms of pandemic influenza, that's a real dilemma, because we have to really be prepared for both situations. And we have to be able to communicate that to the policymakers, because a lot of them tend to think it's either emergency mode or it's the usual mode. And the answer is, we need both. We may not be able to convince many ministers of health or ministers of finance that seasonal influenza vaccine is the way that they should spend their precious dollars or their funding. But we can certainly get their attention in terms of our experience with H1N1 is this could have been so much worse. And we need the capacity to maybe build gradually on seasonal vaccine. We need to use technology. We need to have very creative ideas of how we can also deal with a surge capacity. So it's not either or. It really needs to be both. And that's going to be a very difficult communications to be successful in. So I'm hearing a lot from this conference about the promise of new technology. In the next couple years, in order to achieve these long-term and implement these long-term strategies, I would suspect that everyone in this room would probably agree that there needs to be more investment now in developing those technologies so that you can end up with a product in 10 to 15 years. Are there other things in medium and long-term strategies that we need to speak about? I think the regulatory aspects fall into this category. Again, it's like a new technology, but it's a new skill. And it's a skill and experience that you don't gain overnight. So again, I think that we are talking about a lot of investment of time and energy and funds now that over a period of 2 to 5 to 10 to 15 years, we will see the results from those investments. And we have failed many times to express to the policymakers that the fix is not tomorrow, that it takes long-term investment in order to achieve these goals. Okay, rest of the quiz. Turn your papers over. And you will be graded on these. You have 3 essay questions. You don't have to write an essay. Just words, random words. What are the 3 most important investments and/or activities in the next 2 years to support increasing sustainable influenza vaccine production capacity over the next 3 to 15 years? You only get 3 choices. This is called prioritization among a group of experts. And I know that if you're a laboratory expert, you're going to focus on the laboratory. But this is a very informal and an opportunity for us to have a poll, have a survey in terms of what you've heard and what to you has been most convincing in terms of the 3 most important investments or activities. Second on your quiz are what are the 2 most important milestones? Meaning we are going to achieve this by January 2012. And 3, what outcomes or products from this workshop would be most helpful to promote and/or support sustainable influenza vaccine production in developing countries? My objective in this session was not to definitively answer any of these questions, but rather to stimulate the thinking among everybody in this room, the dialogue between the very different representatives of all the stakeholders in this room, and for us to seriously engage in thinking and planning and working together to engage additional stakeholders and to identify important next steps and to identify what we truly want to achieve in terms of measurable milestones. So when you finished, pass your paper to the aisle and we'll pick them up. Thank you.